This article summarizes the phonology of Standard Chinese. Standard Chinese is based on the Beijing dialect of Mandarin. Actual production varies widely among speakers, as they inadvertently introduce elements of their native dialects. Elements of the sound system include not only the segments the vowels and consonants of the language but also the tones that are applied to each syllable. Standard Chinese has 4 main tones, in addition to a neutral tone used on weak syllables. This article represents phonetic values using the International Phonetic Alphabet, noting correspondences chiefly with the pinyin system for transcription of Chinese text. For correspondences with other systems, see the relevant articles, such as Wadaya Giles, Butpamofo, Goya Romatsu, etc., and romanization of Chinese. Consonants. The following table shows the consonant sounds of Standard Chinese, transcribed using the International Phonetic Alphabet. The sounds shown in parentheses are frequently not analyzed as separate phonemes. For more on these, see Palatal series and glides, below. Excluding these, there are 19 consonant phonemes in the inventory. Between pairs of stops or affricates having the same place and manner of articulation, the primary distinction is not voiced versus voiceless, but unaspirated versus aspirated. The unaspirated stops and affricates may however become voiced in weak syllables. Such pairs are represented in the pinyin system mostly using letters which principally denote voiceless voiced pairs, with the voiceless letter representing an aspirated sound, and the voiced letter an unaspirated sound. For example, pinyin P and B represent respectively and. More details about the individual consonant sounds are given in the following table. All of the consonants may occur as the initial sound of a syllable, with the exception of the glides, J, E, N, W, may also be medials. The only consonants that can appear in syllable coda position are, and. Final, may be pronounced without complete oral closure, resulting in a syllable that in fact ends with a long nasalized vowel. See also syllable reduction, below. Dentialveolar and retroflex series equals, the consonants listed in the first table above as dentialveolar are sometimes described as alveolars, and sometimes as dentals. The affricates and fricative are particularly often described as dentals. These are generally pronounced with the tongue on the lower teeth. The retroflex consonants are produced with the tongue blade rather than the underside of the tongue tip, and so are considered by some authors not to be truly retroflex. They may be more accurately called laminal postalveolar. Speakers not from Beijing often lack the retroflexes in their native dialects, and may thus replace them with dentals. Palatal series equals, the palatal consonants, T°C, T°C E, are pronounced by some speakers as palatalized dentals, T-say², T-say°E², say². This is especially common among children and females. In phonological analysis, it is often assumed that, when not followed by one of the high front vowels, I, or Y, the palatals consist of a consonant followed by a palatal glide. That is, syllables represented in pinyin as beginning G, Ki, Xi, Ju, Ka, Zu are taken to begin, T°C plus, J, T°C E plus, J, E, plus, J, T°C plus, En, T°C E plus, En, E, plus, En. The actual pronunciations are more like, T°C, T°C E, T°C E, T°C E. This is consistent with a general observation the medial glides are realized as palatalization and or velarization of the preceding consonant. On the above analysis, the palatals are in complementary distribution with the dentals, Ts, T-say°, S, with the velars, K, K°, X, and with the retroflexes, EI angstrom, E, E, as none of these can occur before high front vowels or palatal glides, whereas the palatals occur only before high front vowels or palatal glides. Therefore, linguists often prefer to classify T°C, T°C E, not as independent phonemes, but as allophones of one of the other three series. The existence of the above-mentioned dental variants inclines some to prefer to identify the palatals with the dentals, but identification with any of the three series is possible. The Yale and Wadaya Eurogiles systems mostly treat the palatals as allophones of the retroflexes. Tonal Pinyin mostly treats them as allophones of the dentals, and Chinese Braille treats them as allophones of the velars. In Standard Pinyin and Butmamofo, however, they are represented as a separate sequence. The palatals arose historically from a merger of the dentals, ts, t-say degree, s, and velars, k, k degree, x, before high front vowels and glides. Previously, some instances of modern, t degree Celsius, e degree I, were instead, k, e degree I, and others were, ts, e degree I. The change took place in the last 2 or 3 centuries at different times in different areas, but not in the Jiang grade dialect used at the imperial court. This explains why some European transcriptions of Chinese names contain ki, hai, zai, or si, where a palatal might be expected. Examples are Peking for Beijing, Chongqing for Chongqing, Fujian for Fujian, Tianjin for Tianjin, Sankiang for Xinjiang, and Shan for Xi'an. The complementary distribution with the retroflex series arose when syllables that had a retroflex consonant followed by a medial glide lost the medial glide. Glides equals, the glides, j, en and w, sound respectively like the y in English yes, the h, u in French hute, and the w in English we. The glides are commonly analyzed not as independent phonemes, but as consonantal allophones of the high vowels, and. This is possible since there is no ambiguity in interpreting a sequence like delicious, and potentially problematic sequences such as do not occur. The glides may occur in initial position in a syllable. This occurs with en in the syllables written u, yuan, yu, yun and yong in pinyin. With j, in other syllables written with initial y in pinyin. And with w, in syllables written with initial w in pinyin. When a glide is followed by the vowel of which that glide is considered an allophone, the glide may be regarded as a penthetic, and not as a separate realization of the phoneme. Hence the syllable yi, pronounced g, may be analyzed as consisting of the single phoneme, and similarly yin may be analyzed as u as, and wu as. The glides can also occur in medial position, that is, after the initial consonant but before the main vowel. Here they are represented in pinyin as vowels, for example, the Anbai represents j, and the Yuanduan represents w. There are some restrictions on the possible consonant-glide combinations. W does not occur after labials. J does not occur after retroflexes and velars. And en occurs medially only in la 1/4 e and now 1/4 e, and after palatals a consonant-glide combination at the start of a syllable is articulated as a single sound. The glide is not in fact pronounced after the consonant, but is realized as palatalization, e squared, labialization, e, or both, a paragraph pound, of the consonant. Non-syllabic forms of the vowels and are also found as the final element in some syllables, that is as the second element of a diphthong. These are notated sometimes as j and w, but often rather as e and eshi. These cases are discussed below under vowels. 0 onset equals a full syllable such as I, in which the vowel is not preceded by any of the standard initial consonants or glides, is said to have a null initial or 0 onset. This may be realized as a consonant sound, e pound, e, angstrom and e are possibilities, and it has been suggested that such an onset be regarded as a special phoneme, or as an instance of the phoneme, although it can also be treated as no phoneme. By contrast, in the case of the particle isha, which is a weak onsetless syllable, linking occurs with the previous syllable. Rhotic coda equals. Standard Chinese features syllables that end with a rhotic coda. This feature, known in Chinese as eua, is particularly characteristic of the Beijing dialect. Many other dialects do not use it as much, and some not at all. It occurs in two cases, in a small number of independent words or morphemes pronounced, E unregistered trademark EA Euro or AA Euro, written in pinyin as a, such as AA2, E Euro Q Daria, and AA copyright are some. In syllables in which the rhotic coda is added as a suffix to another morpheme. This suffix is represented by the character a, to which meaning it is historically related, and in pinyin as r. The suffix combines with the final sound of the syllable, and regular but complex sound changes occur as a result. The r final can be analyzed as representing the same phoneme as the initial, ee. However, the final sound is pronounced with a relatively lax tongue, and has been described as a retroflex vowel. In dialects that do not make use of the rhotic coda, it may be omitted in pronunciation, or in some cases a different word may be selected, for example, Beijing E unregistered trademark as a here, and a now there may be replaced by the synonyms E unregistered trademark ea zali and a na li. Syllabic consonants equals, the syllables written in pinyin as xi, psi, si, zi, chi, shi, ri may be described as having a syllabic consonant in place of a vowel. For more analysis see below. Syllabic consonants may also arise as a result of weak syllable reduction. See below. Syllabic nasal consonants are also heard in certain interjections. Pronunciations of such words include m, n, angstrom, hm, ha. Vowels. Standard Chinese can be analyzed as having 5 or 6 vowel phonemes, and according to some analyses also. The vowel is a low vowel, is a mid-vowel, and a high vowels. The precise realization of each vowel depends on its phonetic environment. In particular, the vowel has 2 broad allophones, e and o. These sounds can be treated as a single underlying phoneme because they are in complementary distribution. Many Chinese syllables contain diphthongs. These are commonly analyzed as 2 phoneme sequences, the second phoneme being either or. For example, the syllable bai, pronounced p, is assigned the underlying representation. Allophones equals, narrow transcriptions of the vowels. Allophones differ somewhat between sources. The following table provides one fairly typical set of descriptions. Some speakers may pronounce we, Jewishi and we unregistered trademark n, as we, Jew and ni copyright respectively in the first or second tone. As a general rule, vowels in open syllables are pronounced long, while others are pronounced short. This does not apply to weak syllables, in which all vowels are short. The vowel e or empty rhyme equals, the sound of the nucleus of the pinyin syllables xi, psi, si, zi, chi, shi, ri is variously described. If described as a vowel, it may be specified as e, like u, without lip rounding, in xi, psi, si. E, similar to Russian n, in zi, chi, shi, ri. Alternatively, the nucleus may be described not a vowel, but as a syllabic consonant, a syllabic, z, in the syllables xi, psi, si, and a syllabic, e in zi, chi, shi, ri. Phonologically, these syllables may be analyzed as having their own vowel phoneme. However, it is possible to merge this with a phoneme, since the two are in complementary distribution provided that the palatal series is either left unmerged, or is merged with the velars rather than the retroflex or alveolar series. Another approach is to regard the syllables assigned above to as having an empty nucleus slot, that is, as not containing a vowel phoneme at all. This is more consistent with the syllabic consonant description of these syllables. Alternative analyses equals, if all the mergers considered above are accepted, the result is a system with 19 consonant phonemes and 5 vowel phonemes. Some linguists prefer to reduce the number of vowel phonemes still further. Edwin Puller-Blank has proposed a system which includes underlying glides, but no vowels at all. More common are systems with 2 vowels. For example, in Mantaro Hashimoto's system, there are just 2 vowel nuclei, and, which may be preceded by a glide, or, and may be followed by a coda, or. The various glide plus vowel plus coda combinations have different surface manifestations, as shown in the table below. Any of the 3 positions may be empty, that is occupied by a null meter phoneme a. For example, the high vowels, I, U, and Y, are analyzed as glide plus a, and the vowel, E, or empty rhyme is analyzed as having all three values null. For example, C is analyzed as an underlying syllabic. Syllables in Standard Chinese have the maximal form CGVXT, where C is the initial consonant. G is one of the glides, J, W, E, N. V is a vowel. X is a coda which may be one of N, angstrom, E, E, and T is the tone. Any of C, G and X may be absent. C is called the initial, G the medial, and VXT the final, or rhyme. Sometimes the medial is considered part of the rhyme. Many of the possible combinations under the above scheme do not actually occur. There are only some 35 final combinations in actual syllables. In all, there are only about 400 different syllables when tone is ignored, and about 1,300 when tone is included. This is a far smaller number of distinct syllables than in a language such as English. Since Chinese syllables usually constitute whole words, or at least morphemes, the smallness of the syllable inventory results in large numbers of homophones. For a list of all standard Chinese syllables, see the pinyin table or Tuyin table. Full and weak syllables. Syllables can be classified as full and weak. Weak syllables are usually grammatical markers such as a la, or the second syllables of some compound words. A full syllable carries one of the four main tones, and some degree of stress. Weak syllables are unstressed, and have neutral tone. The contrast between full and weak syllables is distinctive. There are many minimal pairs such as if and epsilon a in registered trademark yoshiki, or a main idea, and careless, the second word in each case having a weak second syllable. Some linguists consider this contrast to be primarily one of stress, while others regard it as one of tone. For further discussion, see under neutral tone and stress, below. There is also a difference in syllable length. Full syllables can be analyzed as having du more, the vowel being lengthened if there is no coda. Weak syllables, however, have a single mora, and are pronounced approximately 50% shorter than full syllables. Any weak syllable will usually be an instance of the same morpheme as some corresponding strong syllable. The weak form will often have a modified pronunciation, however, as detailed in the following section. Syllable reduction apart from differences in tone, length and stress, weak syllables are subject to certain other pronunciation changes. If a weak syllable begins with an unaspirated obstruent, such as B, D, G, Z, J, that consonant may become voiced. For example, in a zouk bar, the second syllable is likely to begin with a, B, sound, rather than an unaspirated, P. The vowel of a weak syllable is often reduced, becoming more central. For example, in the word zouk bar just mentioned, the final vowel may become a schwa, an unregistered trademark. The coda of a weak syllable is often dropped. If the dropped coda was a nasal consonant, the vowel may be nasalized. For example, sentenciodi may end with a monophthong, e rather than a diphthong, and epsilon carntian may end with a centralized and nasalized vowel, unregistered trademark permil. In some cases, the vowel may be dropped altogether. This may occur, particularly with high vowels, when the unstressed syllable begins with a fricative or an aspirated consonant. For example, e plus or minus e da squared fu may be said as da squared uf, and e, registered trademark e cent ynti as ynt. The same may even occur in full syllables that have low tone. The vowel may also be dropped after a nasal, in such words as eukmin and a to the first sha copyright nme, which may be said as wc and sha copyright ma euro. These are examples of the merger of two syllables into one, which occurs in a variety of situations in connected speech. The example of sha copyright nme as sha copyright m also involves assimilation, which is heard even in unreduced syllables in quick speech. A particular case of assimilation is that of the sentence final exclamatory particle a weak syllable, which has different characters for its assimilated forms. Tones. Standard Chinese, like all Chinese dialects, is a tonal language. This means that in addition to consonants and vowels, the pitch contour of a syllable is used to distinguish words from each other. Many non-native Chinese speakers have difficulties mastering the tones of each character, but correct tonal pronunciation is essential for intelligibility because of the vast number of words in the language that only differ by tone. Statistically, tones are as important as vowels in Standard Chinese. Tonal categories. The following table shows the four main tones of Standard Chinese, together with the neutral tone. The Chinese names of the main four tones are respectively E-cubed, E unregistered trademark degree A-cubed Yin par Ng, E-cubed A-cubed, E unregistered trademark 1/2 A-cubed Yin G par Ng, A HCNG, and a QA to the first. As descriptions, they apply rather to the predecessor Middle Chinese tones than to the modern tones. See below. The modern Standard Chinese tones are produced as follows. First tone, or high-level tone, is a steady high sound, produced as if it were being sung instead of spoken. Second tone, or rising tone, or more specifically high-rising, is a sound that rises from middle to high pitch. In a three-syllable expression, if the first syllable has first or second tone and the final syllable is not weak, then a second tone on the middle syllable may change to first tone. Third tone, low or dipping tone, descends from mid-low to low. Between other tones it may simply be low. This tone is often demonstrated as having a rise in pitch after the low fall. However, when a third tone syllable is not said in isolation, this rise is normally heard only if it appears at the end of a sentence or before a pause, and then usually only on stressed monosyllables. The third tone without the rise is sometimes called half-third tone. Third tone syllables that include the rise are significantly longer than other syllables. For further variation in syllables carrying this tone, see third tone sandhi, below. Unlike the other tones, third tone is pronounced with breathiness or murmur. Fourth tone, falling tone, or high falling, features a sharp fall from high to low. When followed by another fourth tone syllable, the fall may be only from high to mid-level. For the neutral tone or fifth tone, see the following section. Most romanization systems, including pinyin, represent the tones as diacritics on the vowels, although some, like Wadaya Eurogiles, use superscript numbers at the end of each syllable. The tone marks and numbers are rarely used outside of language textbooks. In particular, they are usually absent in public signs, company logos, and so forth. Goya Romatsi is a rare example of a system where tones are represented using normal letters of the alphabet. Neutral tone also called fifth tone or zeroth tone, neutral tone is sometimes thought of as a lack of tone. It is associated with weak syllables, which are generally somewhat shorter than tonic syllables. The pitch of a syllable with neutral tone is determined by the tone of the preceding syllable. The following table shows the pitch at which the neutral tone is pronounced in Standard Chinese after each of the four main tones. The situation differs by dialect, and in some regions, notably Taiwan, the neutral tone is relatively uncommon. Although the contrast between weak and full syllables is often distinctive, the neutral tone is often not described as a full-fledged tone. Some linguists feel that it results from a spreading out of the tone on the preceding syllable. This idea is appealing because without it, the neutral tone needs relatively complex tone sandhi rules to be made sense of. Indeed, it would have to have four allotons, one for each of the four tones that could precede it. However, the spreading theory incompletely characterizes the neutral tone, especially in sequences where more than one neutral tone syllable is found adjacent. Relationship between Middle Chinese and modern tones the four tones of Middle Chinese are not in one-to-one correspondence with the modern tones. The following table shows the development of the traditional tones as reflected in modern Standard Chinese. The development of each tone depends on the initial consonant of the syllable, whether it was a voiceless consonant, a voiced obstruent, or a sonorant. Tone sandhi, Pronunciation also varies with context according to the rules of tone sandhi. Some such changes have been noted above in the descriptions of the individual tones. However, the most prominent phenomena of this kind relate to consecutive sequences of third-tone syllables. There are also a few common words that have variable tone. Third-tone sandhi . The principal rule of third-tone sandhi is, when there are two consecutive third-tone syllables, the first of them is pronounced with second tone. For example, LCOSHC comes to be pronounced LOSHC, Lineshi microampere kappa A. Copyright. It has been investigated whether the rising contour on the prior syllable is in fact identical to a normal second tone. It has been concluded that it is, at least in terms of auditory perception. When there are three or more third tones in a row, the situation becomes more complicated, since a third tone that precedes a second tone resulting from third tone sandhi may or may not be subject to sandhi itself. The results may depend on word boundaries, stress, and dialectal variations. General rules for three-syllable third-tone combinations can be formulated as follows: if the first word is two syllables and the second word is one syllable, then the first two syllables become second tones. For example, BCOGUKEN HCO takes the pronunciation BARAGUEN HCO, PIASHI microampere yen QEA microampere yen XSHI. If the first word is one syllable, and the second word is two syllables, the second syllable becomes second tone, but the first syllable remains third tone. For example, LCO BCOGUKEN takes the pronunciation LCO BARAGUKEN, Lineshi copyright PIASHI microampere yen QEAN. Some linguists have put forward more comprehensive systems of sandhi rules for multiple third-tone sequences. For example, it is proposed that modifications are applied cyclically, initially within rhythmic feet, and that sandhi need not apply between two cyclic branches. Tones on special syllables . Special rules apply to the tones heard on the words a bar to the first and a ya. For a bar to the first, a is pronounced with second tone when followed by a fourth tone syllable. Example, a becomes bar sha, pu microampere kappa e lambda copyright. In other cases, a is pronounced with fourth tone. However, when used between words in an a not a question, it may become neutral in tone. For a ya, a is pronounced with second tone when followed by a fourth tone syllable. Example, a registered trademark sh becomes ya da ng, e a microampere yen ch e lambda copyright. Before a first, second or third tone syllable, a is pronounced with fourth tone. Example #1 sha a becomes ya tan, e a lambda copyright te degree e a nien, a a to the first becomes ya nien, e a lambda copyright ni a ni microampere yen, a e micron becomes ya qc, e a lambda copyright t degree Celsius e degree a. When final, or when it comes at the end of a multi-syllable word, a is pronounced with first tone. It also has first tone when used as an ordinal number, and when it is immediately followed by any digit. When a is used between two reduplicated words, it may become neutral in tone. The numbers a florin and qa, and a bar sometimes display similar tonal behavior as a ya, but for most modern speakers they are always pronounced with first tone. Stress, rhythm and intonation. Stress within words is not felt strongly by Chinese speakers, although contrastive stress is perceived easily. One of the reasons for the weaker perception of stress in Chinese may be that variations in the fundamental frequency of speech, which in many other languages serve as a cue for stress, are used in Chinese primarily to realize the tones. Nonetheless, there is still a link between stress and pitch. The range of pitch variation has been observed to be greater on syllables that carry more stress. As discussed above, weak syllables have neutral tone and are unstressed. Although this property can be contrastive, the contrast is interpreted by some as being primarily one of tone rather than stress. Apart from this contrast between full and weak syllables, some linguists have also identified differences in levels of stress among full syllables. In some descriptions, a multi-syllable word or compound is said to have the strongest stress on the final syllable, and the next strongest generally on the first syllable. Others, however, reject this analysis, noting that the apparent final syllable stress can be ascribed purely to natural lengthening of the final syllable of a phrase, and disappears when a word is pronounced within a sentence rather than in isolation. Sandwin-Mu takes this view, and concludes that it is the first syllable that is most strongly stressed. He also notes a tendency for Chinese to produce trochees feet consisting of a stressed syllable followed by one unstressed syllables. On this view, if the effect of final lengthening is factored out, in words of 2 syllables, the first syllable has the main stress, and the second lacks stress. In words of 3 syllables, the first syllable is stressed most strongly, the second lacks stress, and the third may lack stress or have secondary stress. In words of 4 syllables, the first syllable is stressed most strongly, the second lacks stress, and the third or fourth may lack stress or have secondary stress depending on the syntactic structure of the compound. The positions described here as lacking stress are the positions in which weak syllables may occur, although full syllables frequently occur in these positions also. This preference for a trochaic metrical structure is also cited as a reason for certain phenomena of word order variation within complex compounds, and for the strong tendency to use disyllabic words rather than monosyllables in certain positions. Many Chinese monosyllables have alternative disyllabic forms with virtually identical meaning. See Chinese grammar. A word formation. Another function of voice pitch is to carry intonation. Chinese makes frequent use of particles to express certain meanings such as doubt, query, command, etc., reducing the need to use intonation. However, intonation is still present in Chinese, although there are varying analyses of how it interacts with the lexical tones. Some linguists describe an additional intonation rise or fall at the end of the last syllable of an utterance, while others have found that the pitch of the entire utterance is raised or lowered according to the desired intonational meaning. References. Further reading: Li, E. Z. Eric, Standard Chinese, Journal of the International Phonetic Association 33, 109 112, doi, 10.1017 per second 00251003030012008. External links.